So, ever since Fatima Payman has left the Labour Party, I've been hearing a bit about Muslim Votes Matters, and I was looking at some of the seats that they're targeting. Now, a lot of the seats that they're targeting are very safe Labour seats, have been ancestrally. First one, Watson. Again, a lot of these electorates that I'm seeing getting potentially, I say potentially with emphasis, targeted in future, may or may not be the right word, but anyway, getting looked at the very least. Like looking at Watson, pretty much has only ever had Labour members. Now, granted, to be fair, Tony Burke won like 50% of the first preference vote, but I have to admit, like even though the United Australia vote and One Nation vote combined goes over the Greens, you got to sort of wonder how much of the vote it would take from Labour. To be fair, I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to say that, potentially these candidates might be, I don't know, Labour's version of the Teals. But hey, who knows? The less safe seats there are for parties in the future, the better, and that goes for both sides. Now, the other electorate I think that was worth looking at, Blaxland and Wiriwa. Damn, I wish we had a simpler name for these electorates, but anyway. So Blaxland, if I'm not mistaken, I think this is another one that was very safe Labour seat. Yeah, this one's been safe Labour since like literally the late 40s. And Jason Clare himself, again, another one that got more than like 50% of the first preference votes. And again, this is another one of those areas where United Australia and One Nation got more votes than the Greens combined, but I strongly suspect this could shake up results. Now, as for Wiriwa, really is a tongue twister, this one. This one kind of swung back and forth early on, but it's pretty much been mostly held by the Labour since, you'd have to go back to the mid-30s. So what, nearly 100 years now. Compared to the other ones, though, this is interesting. Liberal Democrats in United Australia both got more votes than the Greens, although I strongly suspect this was in response to the lockdowns that were occurring in Western Sydney during the pandemic. So I think that's why you saw the right-wing vote among One Nation and United Australia really do quite well back then. Again, I think this is another one of those areas where the votes could really be potentially shaken up by another candidate. The other ones, I think Labour would have won the seat, but on a much more reduced margin if Fatima Payman was to run her own party, or maybe not run her own party, but put forward maybe ideas for candidates and the like. The other ones I think Labour would have kept on a much reduced margin. I think if there's one seat to definitely look out for, though, it's probably this one. Because you look at the Greens and Labour, the vote combined barely gets above 46%. So I think the remainder of the Labour vote, damn, 10,000 informal votes. I think those were votes that were keyed in but tossed out. In this seat, you could definitely sort of tell that there's clearly been some preferences from United Australia and One Nation to Labour to winning the seat, so that's intriguing. I always kind of made the assumption that United Australia and One Nation would like always preference Liberals over Labour, but it's kind of interesting to see the votes from the 2022 election, because I think for both of these two specific parties, anywhere from like 25 to, I don't know, 45% of the two-party preferences went to Labour, whereas the remainder went to the Liberals. Now, of course, naturally, I think they typically favoured Liberals, but the fact that some of them went to Labour is intriguing, But I think this might be one of those seats that may be at risk, depending on how many votes get taken away from Labour over this. Now, there was one or two other electorates. Oh, that's interesting. Colwell, Scullin, Bruce Holt, Wills, huh? Well, the Greens were pretty close to Wills, I think, last time. So let's go back and have a look. Inner North seat, held mostly by Labor, but there was an independent representing the seat at one point. But if you actually have a look at this, I think I might have gone back to this before. The fact that a Greens candidate on preference could get more votes than Labor, I think if Muslim votes were to potentially put forward a candidate here, this is another one of those seats that could shake things up a little bit. Although, to be fair, if ever there was a seat among that was at risk for Labor from different quarters, it was probably this one. Caldwell, Scullin, Bruce and Hull. Well, let's have a look at them, shall we? Now, Caldwell electorate, if I'm not mistaken, this one's like much further north, like right on the outer edges. Oh, it takes him 40, the more you know. Anyway, looking at this, pretty historically Labor, again, for the most part anyway. Now, so Vic Socialists would typically preference the Greens, so that would get them, 11,700 votes. Now, Australian Federation, if I'm not mistaken, they're centre right to right wing, anti-lockdown, Jesus. Okay, so again, you have a look at Australian Federation, which likely would have preferenced One Nation or United Australia. Flowing of preferences, they would have gone to Liberals, so they would have jumped ahead of the Greens. So, I mean, unless Labor lose votes to the Greens somehow, do I see Labor losing this electorate? Not quite. I'd say not quite, because I get the feeling if they got some of the votes they would have gotten, I think you could almost imagine some, I don't know about Australian Federation, but definitely One Nation and UAP preferences instead of going to the Liberals as I would expect. I think you've seen one or two of them go to Labor. I think that would explain the two-party preferred vote here, because you would add up Vic Socialists and Greens, that only adds up to about 11,700 votes, and even then, that's not quite 50,000. So yeah, you can see where the preferences have gone. Division of Scullin. So let's have a look, shall we? Division of Scullin. Okay, it's another one, pretty historically Labor without fail. Another one where you kind of see Labor getting close to 50% of the vote, but not quite. Although mine, again, you sort of knows Vic Socialists, that's, let's do math, 12,400. Yeah, so you can clearly see between the Liberal Democrats, One Nation and United Australia, which are all right-of-centre parties, they'd overtake the Greens on the numbers. To be fair, looking at this, it seems to me like Labor's still got, again, a little bit, I don't know about Liberal Democrats, but certainly some of the One Nation and UAP preferences going to them instead of the Liberals. What can I say? ScoMo was really universally unpopular. I think it stretched beyond typical ideologies. Now, let's look at two more. Division of Bruce. Okay, this is interesting. Kind of held by Liberals for quite a few years, but it's been pretty much Labor since the mid-90s. Okay. Yeah, see, this is another one of those seats where you can sort of see that between One Nation preferencing either the Liberal Democrats and United Australia, the combined vote for all of these parties is more than the Greens. Now, to be fair, I think Greens' preferences going to Labor would have gotten them over the line in Bruce. Although, to be fair, I think there was like 1 in every 6 or 7 preferences from the Greens do go to the Liberals. There is a very specific demographic like that. But even if you were to really crunch down the numbers, like, that wouldn't get them to 50,000. So you could just sort of imagine some of the preferences going from One Nation or Liberal Democrats or United Australia going to Labor here. Because again, the Greens alone doesn't get them the full number like that. So there was one more, I think. Halt. Right, let's have a look. division of Holt kind of swung back and forth, but it's been pretty consistently Labour since like early 80s. But let's have a look here. In fact, this one's like right on like the southeastern edges too. Yeah, good old Cranbourne. So having a look at this. Now that's interesting. United Australia have got more first preference votes than the Greens, so that's intriguing. But I think that was probably as a result of like the lockdowns hitting some of those communities really friggin' hard. Don't know about the independents specifically, but a lot of these other ones, Australian Federation, Liberal Democrats, One Nation, UA, all right of centre or right wing. Mind, Labor's still got a good chunk of the vote, I suspect, but if you were to have a real crunch at the numbers, even then, you would obviously kind of see that even if the Independent and the Greens were all preferencing Labor, that doesn't explain how they got Labor got all of their numbers there. So again, it's probably preferences from some of these parties going to Labor over the Liberals. What can I say again? ScoMo wasn't a very popular bloke. Well, I will say this. It's definitely worth keeping an eye on. I do have to admit, for a preface, somehow I don't think One Nation or United Australia are going to keep up their voting totals. I think there was a big response to lockdowns way back when the pandemic was going on. That did elicit a very political response. And to be fair to United Australia, the only senator they've got in the Australian Senate did come from Victoria. I think there was a lot of people that were super pissed about how lockdowns went. But definitely I think this is something worth keeping an eye on.